Matthew said, today's topic is revolving around what we're going to call toxicities and deficiencies, and I'll define that in the slides coming soon. But this was kind of inspired from some of our conversations in past webinars, specifically the one we just did last month, which is kidney health, because we talked about detoxifying our body, how much is too much, what taxes the system, what dosage makes things, quote unquote, poisonous. And so I figured let's go into a whole conversation just around those things. And so walking through here, some of the takeaways that I hope you come away with, gaining a clearer understanding of some of these objectives by the time we are done with our conversation, and then going into some of our housekeeping items here. As you probably heard when you were entering into the webinar, this session is being recorded. Matthew and I will keep our eyes on the chat box, so you can always type things in there, but if I can't stop to answer, we also have a Q&A section at the end. I always make sure I tell you to, while I'm a dietitian, I'm not your dietitian, so please make sure that you are taking this only as informational and educational, and making sure you're checking in with your own healthcare team before you start or stop any kind of healthcare regimen and getting clearance to do so. So if we've never met before, hello, my name is Dina D'Alessandro. I am a registered dietitian, also sometimes known as a nutritionist. I'm currently, whenever you see the bed behind me, I'm currently in Ocean County, New Jersey, visiting my sweet mom, hanging out down here, but I usually live and work outside of in New York City. I also am the adjunct lecturer up at the Lehman College campus in the Bronx, where I teach undergraduate and graduate nutrition studies. I won't go through the rest of all these bullets. You can read them on your own because we have a lot to cover today. So I'm just going to get right into it. If you remember, a handful of months ago, we talked about one of our webinars was called Macros and Micros and Food Groups, oh my, where we talked about the definitions behind what is a food and how foods are created. And so I'm going to do a bit of a refresher. So from that discussion, if you remember, macronutrients, macros are your carbs and your fats and your proteins. Macro meaning large size molecules and large sized units of measurement. So we need those things in grams. That's how we measure our macronutrients. And I also call those kind of like the quantity of our food, because not only is it larger items, but it's also providing us with calories. Calories is the energy that makes our body run. Micronutrients, so micro meaning small, smaller size molecules, smaller size quantities as well. You can see they're milligrams and micrograms instead of grams. And this is what I tend to refer to as the quality of our food, the vitamins and the minerals, the chemical structures and substances that we take in that help our body run and perform its function. What has micronutrients in it? Everything does. All the things that you can think about in our food does, but they're not always equally distributed, and they're not always in the same shape or form. So this is why we very much encourage a balanced diet and a varied diet to make sure that you're meeting all of those nutritional requirements. Now, I just want to stop for a sec to recognize that not everybody can meet those nutritional requirements, and we'll talk about in a second as to why that is sometimes, and also giving recognition to what we call the social determinants of health. Sometimes factors outside of our own control, like education, location, accessibility, affordability, also can affect adversely our health outcomes, and it might not necessarily be our responsibility or ability to take control of that. All right, so we're going to jump into the definitions and distinctions. And as you can see on screen here, when we're talking about micronutrient deficiencies, we're talking about that the body is lacking an essential vitamin or mineral, and it could be for a variety of reasons. Again, I'll go into more detail coming soon. But these insufficient intake, or we might have absorption issues in our body, can cause certain functions to not to be able to happen. And so this is why, again, we recognize or encourage adequate diversity in our diet, and we supplement only when necessary. So if we're getting diagnosed being deficient in something, then we can take pills for that. But we usually try to say diet first. And then in contrast, what is toxicity? It doesn't always mean poison or death. It just means putting us into a more negative reaction. And when we have the toxicity discussion, we're really talking about excessive supplementation. It's a little hard to eat yourself to a point of toxicity, but as I said earlier, if your body is dealing with issues that doesn't allow you to utilize or process properly the food that you're taking in or the beverages that you're taking in, there can be an absorption issue and an excretion issue, and then things accumulate in our body, and that can become quote unquote toxic as well. So here is where we tend to tell people, be careful with excessively taking supplements, or speak with your doctor and maintaining more of a well-balanced diet. All right, I love to give you a behind the scenes look at what a dietitian does. My friends, for anybody who's watching this, if you were in health sciences, DFN 445 with Dr. Boyer back in the day, she made us memorize this thing. This is an excerpt of a very large textbook that has a wide variety of reference standards and information. So in the general population, what this is known as, we have something called the dietary reference intakes. That's kind of like an umbrella general term. And within that general term lies something called the RDAs, the recommended dietary allowances, meaning because of science and because of patterns in history and because of certain chronic conditions, we know that we recommend that everybody gets in a certain amount of different vitamins and minerals in order to meet their daily requirements for their bodies to perform properly. And this is based on what is known as the quote unquote average daily level and majority of healthy people. If we have people who are dealing with complications or conditions that put them in an unhealthy category, then we modify this accordingly. But on the left-hand side, you can see it's actually broken out by life stage or life cycle, and it's also separated out by sex, male and female, and pregnancy, et cetera, is included in there too. So what you're seeing in front of you is just an example of the RDAs for these vitamins across the board. And then contrasting that, yes, there are toxic levels as well. There's how much of too much. Here's the answer, friends, making sure that we don't reach that excessive amount. And again, as I said, usually with food intake, it's a little hard to get to that level. But if you're supplementing excessively or you're having a mega dose of something, we really want to make sure we're keeping an eye on that. So let's look as an example here. We have calcium, which is like the fourth column over, milligrams per day. Now, we didn't see that in the previous page because that was just vitamins, but this is the mineral. And usually for women, of an older adult population age, 60 and older or so, we usually recommend about 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams per day to meet your needs, bone density, and any other functions in your body that require calcium to perform. Now, you can see here on the bottom, it just stops at 19 to 30 years, but the same diff. It's about 2,500 to 3,000 would be considered the tolerable upper level. Anything more than that could end up providing us with an adverse health effect. So that's just an example of one of the things that could potentially lead to toxicity. And I'll go more into detail in the slides to come. So as kind of like a general summary of what puts us at risk for either deficiencies or toxicities, some of these things are age related. As we age, as we go through life cycle stages, we become a little bit more prone to things, or we might have different environmental factors that affect our overall health and impact our nutrient absorption and metabolism, the ability to make nutrients and do things in our body that require different kinds of functions to perform. We can also have chronic conditions. So obviously last month we talked about kidneys. We're going to be talking about liver coming soon, but those organs are really important in helping process and utilize a lot of the nutrients in our body and also responsible for excreting things. So if that's a little messed up, you end up either building up or being deficient in something too. And GI, if you remember the gut health discussion from a way while back, we talked about in one end and out the other, but a whole lot of stuff goes on in between through what are known as your sites of absorption. So if you're unable to absorb a particular micronutrient and send it off in the direction of where it needs to perform its function, then that can be a deficiency issue, or it can build up in the body and that becomes a toxicity issue. And then we also have things like food and medicine interactions, and I'll talk a little bit more about that too. And then again, the last two bullets here, honoring some of the food insecurity concerns or not being able to have a well-varied diet. Within this discussion here, I wanted to remind us that we have like immunocompromised or special populations. So pregnancy, older adults, we see a lot of times changes in the gut, changes in the microbiome because you might be taking a lot of medicine or you might be dealing with coexisting chronic conditions that your body is constantly in a state of fighting inflammation, or your immune system again might be compromised. Anyone who smokes or drinks excessively, they're kind of blocking the pathways that are needed for us to utilize those nutrients as well. And if we follow things like very strict, whether it's on purpose or with disordered eating diets, or even vegan and vegetarian diets, we might be missing out on some of the food groups that are necessary to provide us with those micronutrients. So let's show here in these coming slides some of the more common micronutrient deficiencies. And again, just to repeat, when we're talking about deficiencies, we're really talking about you didn't get enough of the food, but sometimes there's exceptions to that too, as I said before, with some issues around absorption or medicine interactions. So one of the many common ones that we have here is vitamin B12. That is found primarily in animal sources and or fortified foods. So if you're following a very strict vegan diet, you might be deficient in vitamin B12. You might need to supplement. And because again, with the GI tract, if you've undergone GI issues or bariatric surgery, there's sites of absorption there that might be compromised, and you might have to get supplementation because you are not able to get that through your food. So you'll see some side effects like fatigue, and even something like memory loss could happen if you're vitamin B12 deficient. Vitamin D, not necessarily related to food. The sunshine actually provides us with enough vitamin D, but sometimes we have limited sun exposure, or we've been told to slather ourselves with sunscreen, or if you have a darker pigmentation on your skin, it's a little harder for the vitamin D to penetrate. And if you are able to get this in food form, this is usually in fish and egg yolks and some fortified foods as well. Kidney and liver disorders too, because again, like I said, those are the organs that help with processing and utilizing it. So if we have some damage there, we might be vitamin D deficient, and you'll see things related to bone thinning or muscle weakness, etc. Related to vitamin D and calcium kind of go hand in hand, especially when it comes to the bone health discussion. And as I'm sure you know, right, calcium can be found in a variety of dairy-based food products, but it can also be found in some plant-based items like broccoli or sesame seeds or almonds. And again, if you're dealing with low intake of that, or you have a food allergy like a dairy allergy, you might not be getting enough calcium. And deficiency here can be directly related to things like bone loss and osteoporosis. Next up, we have folate. So folate and folic acid. Folate is technically the name for vitamin B9. Folic acid is the synthetic or the supplement form of that. And if you've attended anything that I've done before with like life cycle and pregnancies and childbearing ages, folate and folic acid is very, very important during those times if you deal with deficiencies from either not enough in your diet or excessive alcohol use, or certain medications too. So I wrote this down, methotrexate. So methotrexate is used to treat inflammatory issues like psoriasis or arthritis. That can kind of block the pathway of folate and cause a deficiency to happen. Now, in the older population, or really anybody could be at risk for this too, if you don't have proper folate amounts, then it causes what is known as the homocysteine levels in our body to rise. That's a byproduct of when we break down protein. And elevated homocysteine is directly related to increased risk of heart diseases and strokes. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Folate deficiency in the childbearing years, if you're not getting enough there, that can end up causing birth defects. Most specifically, we have something called neural tube defects like spina bifida. That's one of the more common ones that we see. Iron deficiency. A lot of us are iron deficient anemic for sure. And this can happen. We see, as you see on screen here, we have two forms of iron. Iron that is much more what we call bioavailable or easier for us to absorb is more in the animal-based foods, but plant foods also have iron in it too. It's just a different form, a little harder to extract. If you remember some of our conversation, you want to type in the chat. Do you remember what the trick is, how to get the iron out of your plants? You can type that in the chat if you remember. I'll give away the answer in a second. But if you're dealing with deficiencies here, whether it's through poor diet or GI issues, chronic bleeding, heavy menstruation, that can also deplete your iron stores, and you can suffer the consequences of anemia, fatigue, etc. So if you didn't remember, it's vitamin C. Vitamin C, if you're eating plant-based foods like leafy greens or chickpeas, legumes, you add a little like squeeze of lemon, or you chop up some strawberries with your spinach salad, or you add some peppers to your salad or your side dishes, and that can help extract the iron from your plant-based foods. So that's a little fun fact, a little fun trick there. Lastly, magnesium. Magnesium is in mostly plant-based items like soy food, legumes, seeds, whole grains, etc. Sometimes we also see it in dairy products like yogurt. So if you are not having a great diet that is magnesium rich, or you see here it says diuretic use, right? Because what happens when you're flushing out fluids from your system, you're excreting also some other nutrients as well. So some of the minerals like magnesium, and we'll see soon a sodium discussion come up too, where that can deplete your stores, and then thereby you don't have what you need for your body to function properly, and you might see things like muscle cramps and fatigue. All right, so now we're going to go into toxicities. And again, the way that this picture is situated, just as a reminder, is we usually see toxicities more related to excessive supplement use, because it's a little hard to overdo it with the food consumption. There are some exceptions. And I'll start off with vitamin A. So vitamin A is one of the 4 fat-soluble vitamins. Usually with your vitamins B and C, if you have an excessive amount of that, you usually will pee it out. It'll usually come out with your urine. But in the case of the fat-soluble vitamins, with excessive consumption or supplementation, it gets stored in your liver and it can actually cause liver issues. So not only will it not be properly utilized or processed if you're already dealing with liver damage, but it can also lead to liver damage if you're excessively taking in vitamin A. And for anyone who is childbearing years, just as a side note, it can be what's known as a teratogenic effect, meaning there's fetal abnormalities with an excessive amount of vitamin A. Vitamin B6, I'm going to stop on this for a sec because I have a personal story related to this. Back when I used to work at one of the community health centers, we had a patient who underwent bariatric surgery. And as I mentioned, with the GI system, the GI tract, there's sites of absorption. And so part of her GI was resected or removed. And so things were bypassing it. And so they were supplementing her with certain types of vitamin B supplementation. However, in her case, it was overdosing. I don't know if it was the doctor's fault or she was taking excess amounts of it, but she came in complaining about twitches in her face. Like she was noticing her face was twitching or ticking. And sure enough, it was related to vitamin B6 oversupplementation, which we were able to correct. And that ended up subsiding. But vitamin B6 is also sometimes prescribed as an antiemetic, meaning if you're feeling nauseous, it stops you from feeling nauseous. So during pregnancy, we see this in morning sickness, or if people are undergoing things like chemotherapy, or if they have like GI disruptions, they might be given B6. So again, just something to keep in mind that it can mess with your nerve system. So we mentioned before with deficiencies that calcium and vitamin D are quite closely related. And here, same thing too. So if you do have an excessive, a lot of us are vitamin D deficient. So if you do have or are being put on a vitamin D mega dose, it could lead to toxic levels of that can then also affect your calcium stores, which can lead to toxic levels of calcium as well, which ends up happening with, you end up getting, if anybody's had this, one of the most painful things I've ever experienced in my life was a kidney stone. And if you're dealing, especially in the older population, with things like bone density issues or osteoporosis, you might be getting over supplemented with calcium pills. So again, just be mindful, maybe ask for a bone density scan and be conscientious of that. We'll talk a little bit too later on about mega doses of things. Iron. So not just iron supplementation, but there is a genetic disorder called wait, one second, let me get this now. Hemochromatosis, where the body cannot excrete iron properly. And so again, there's a buildup in it, and the treatment around this is actually phlebotomy. So there's bloodletting. That's part of the actual clinical treatment for an excessive amount of iron in the blood, where they excrete the blood. Or sometimes there's also a treatment called chelation medicines or chelation method, where they pull out or extract those heavy metals or those excess mineral stores. So this comes in with, excessive use of supplementation or having that disease, then that can cause things like liver and heart damage, etc. All right, I took some liberties here. Technically, sodium doesn't really have, it says non-determined as far as toxic upper level intake, but I'm going to get on my little soapbox here because we've discussed this in the past that more than 75% of American sodium intake comes from outside foods. Fast foods, packaged goods, restaurant, takeout, even the things that we keep in our house like bread and canned goods, there's usually an excessive amount of sodium in those things. So as a comparison, a recommended amount, like we saw in that little chart earlier, a recommended amount to have our bodies functioning properly is between 1,500 to maybe 2,200 milligrams per day of sodium. So now in comparison, what we've seen with people who are excessively eating outside foods, highly processed foods, a lot of takeout, they hit anywhere between 3,500 to even as high as 6,000 milligrams of sodium per day. So this taxes the system, your kidneys for sure, because that regulates your blood pressure. Blood pressure turns into high blood pressure, and that can put you at risk for heart disease, strokes, and other cardiovascular issues as well. So I thought I'd throw that in there as a quote unquote toxic item to keep an eye out for. And then last but not least, we have, you can drown yourself to death for sure. This is water overconsumption. Now, granted, as much as we encourage you to stay hydrated, I don't think any regular person can really do this, but there is medication, like I mentioned before, with diuretics. So if there's an excessive use of diuretics, you can end up becoming quote unquote overhydrated. Or if you're an endurance athlete and you're running, sweating, and then overhydrating, this is what ends up being known as hypo, low, Natremia, so a very low amount of sodium in the blood. Sodium is needed to help with a lot of body functions and to keep us well balanced. And if we end up with excreting that water and along comes with it all that sodium that we need, then that can cause things like confusion, seizures, and even death, unfortunately. There was a case study once about a marathon runner who ended up dying from overhydration. All right, I want you to, oh, thank you, Matthew. I want you to bear with me here as I was kind of processing this next section about, myths and misinformation. Now that I'm in this career, in this profession as a dietitian, I get these visceral reactions when I see things either being targeted or advertised, or I work with patients who ask me constantly, what do you think of whatever? And, it's really hard for me to stop my eyes from rolling and my tongue from bleeding of what I want to say, because so much of this is just false hope, false claims, no disclaimers, more harm than good, predatory as well, right? They kind of like lurk in certain communities and populations that feel the need that this is going to be the end all be all to cure whatever illness is going on. So I took a step back from the emotion and I just was like, well, why do I think people really actually believe the things that they see? Whether or not it comes from credentialed, qualified personnel, because it's not just social media influencers out there. There's actually doctors who also kind of pitch some snake oil type of things too. So I wanted to break this down in a few reasons why. Number one, cognitive biases and emotional appeal, right? So anybody who's dealing with something that's really complicated or complex or challenging, they're looking for somebody to give them hope. They're looking for somebody to confirm their belief about something. And so that quick fix comes into play and that speaks to somebody's concern. And I think that's what ends up confirming that. And they buy into that, literally and figuratively. The next thing is storytelling is sexy, right? These marketing, branding people, this stuff that like, it worked for me, it'll work for you. I'm on this diet. I took this pill. Look how great I look. I have this ideal, whatever, beach house and perfect job and these awesome clothes. That's appealing. Eating kale and quinoa is not fun and sexy. So I get it. I get that health misinformation just has a better PR team behind it. But within that, sometimes we also see, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on, this fear around things. Don't eat these foods. They're poisonous. Instead, buy my, $20 to $99 a month program where I can send you my personally approved meal plans and these packaged goods that are also highly processed, but pretend like they're not because I put my stamp of approval on it. And so again, I feel like there's a bit of a predatory nature that goes with it, and it leads into that false hope of misinformation. Lastly, we've talked about some of this too, I think, in previous conversations. I understand some skepticism, some growing distrust in government agencies and some healthcare systems for sure. I think we look towards like these underdogs and these whistleblowers, like they're speaking on behalf of the truth and they're really out there advocating for me. And so that appeals to my disillusionment, or these narratives get confirmed. And that's not really always the case versus scientific-based evidence instead. The algorithms, not just with social media. So regardless of whether or not you're on Instagram, maybe if you bought something on Amazon at some point and all of a sudden they're like, hey, if you liked that book, maybe you'll like this book too. Or you watch a Netflix program. If you liked that show, maybe you'll like this show too. Same things apply with all the stuff that we're watching and the inundation of the advertisements and the marketing we're getting on information overload. So they really amplify this sensational content while those evidence-based messages are being more suppressed. And I think what happens is people get used to, well, if I see it often enough, it must be true. It must be true. And so there's that false sense of credibility that if enough people are sharing it, that there must be some truth in it, and there's usually not. And then last but not least, with all due respect to everybody, not everybody knows how to understand research. And we get a lot of times people saying, do your own research, or I looked things up and I figured it out myself. And I would be really careful with stuff like that because you might not understand how to read actual scientific literature. You might not be understanding how causation and correlation works or what those even mean. We'll also talk a little bit shortly in what is known as cherry-picked data and how to understand the significance of a single study versus a meta-analysis or these scientific reviews or systematic reviews. So misinterpretations get passed along a lot as quote unquote truth when it's really not. And I think, again, it's just who has the biggest platform or sounding board and what you are willing to believe without questioning it. So we'll go into some examples here in these following slides. The first thing, and again, tying back to that kidney discussion last month, that if you have a good working body, your body is detoxifying for you. Your body is okay and healthy, and it's a self-cleaning tool. It has the skin, it has the respiratory system, your liver and your kidneys, your intestines, that all is part of your immune system as well. If you are suffering the consequences of something you think is off, please do not give in to these marketing ploys or these miracle cures. Talk to your doctor, figure out what the diagnosis is, and then make your informed decisions as to what you want to do. I mean, we just got done talking about iron, right? Iron toxification is bloodletting, but bloodletting is not the go-to thing for all things that might be your concern or what you think might be quote unquote wrong with you. So again, really dive deep into some of those things and talk to your healthcare providers about that. Next up, some red flags around product marketing and potential vague health claims. So I think the issue here, and I'll talk a little bit more about something that's coming up soon, but the issue here is food packaging is kind of arbitrary, right? You'll see like kid approved, or one of my favorite things that I saw a patient bring in was chocolate chip muffins, and the packaging actually says contains 1 serving of vegetables. Okay, that's great. It's like, is that where I want you to get your vegetables from? No, because what ends up happening then is, one thing is spotlighted and enticing, and then they forget behind the scenes that there's added fat and added sugar or added salt in it. So what is the benefit and the risk there? You're saying, oh, but I'm getting my vegetables in a chocolate chip muffin, but you're also getting an excessive amount of other things that are not necessarily healthy. So they're kind of like downplaying the not great things and, again, spotlighting the stuff that they want you to see. Also, it's really hard to define something like clean or superfood or healthy too. Healthy has a real big concern as to how we define that. And if you ask anybody, whether it's the general population or actual scientists, it's really hard to define that, like how many ingredients equals healthy or not healthy, etc. And so just being conscientious of those things too. Another example that I tend to use is natural peanut butter. When I buy peanut butter, I like peanut butter to have peanuts in it. And that is all I want in my peanut butter. But what happens is sometimes marketers will put natural peanut butter in the front, but then in the ingredients, they're adding sugar. I don't want dessert in my peanut butter. I just want regular peanut butter. So they'll add sugar to it, and they'll also add in extra oils when nuts on their own already produce oils. I don't need any more oils being there. But the reason for that is because it brings the cost down, because peanuts are a little bit expensive to produce. And so if you're thinking to yourself right now, well, Dina, why do they let stuff like that in this food system? That's a good question. Skepticism is good. Go advocate, write your representatives, and inquire from them as to why safe and healthy and accessible and budget-friendly foods are not more available to us. Okay, enough of that. Immune boosting claims. At the height of the pandemic, this was the catchphrase. Take everything you can do to boost your immune system. So this is also a very interesting marketing tool or term. What I think they're trying to say is items or products that will support your immune system or help maybe strengthen your immune system. But if your immune system is already messed up, taking things like this are not necessarily going to do the job. We really want to make sure you're staying properly hydrated and getting enough sleep and managing your stress and eating a good variety of foods. And so what I've learned about this, though, in the clinical world is to use the word that I have a boosted immune system actually means that you're dealing with an autoimmune disorder. So fun fact about that. And what I also came to see is that it's a term that's being integrated into even valid and legitimate organizations. Like I think I saw a WebMD article that said like immune boosting foods. And then there was a small paragraph of like, this really isn't a real term. We're just kind of like jumping on the bandwagon with that. So, as the regular population looks at things, it gets really confusing as to what things mean or don't mean or who you believe or you don't believe. Next up, the more is better. Okay, we just got done saying that's not true, right? If one thing is good, then keep piling things up, not necessarily true. And also, our body really does require a variety of things. So I speak here more towards like maybe fad or trendy diets, like, keto or high protein things where you're completely getting rid of other food groups or ingredients that contain those micronutrients that you need. So you're really, the more is better is actually putting you at risk or making you more deficient in some of the things that you need to properly manage the functions of your body. Not to mention, sometimes these things are also more expensive and not necessarily safe if you're taking in excess of a lot of stuff. So like we just said there too, just reiterating that. Speaking of natural, the quote unquote natural, I came across a couple of examples that I wanted to share. Food dyes are a really hot topic right now as we're going through some observations and seeing what is going on with the food system. And generally speaking, we have things that are known as generally recognized as safe. So one of the things I tend to say, actually, this goes toward maybe towards the more is better discussion too, is if you accidentally ingest an apple seed, not a big deal while you're eating an apple. But if you consume willingly 17 buckets full of apple seeds, you will get cyanide poisoning. So natural also has to meet those requirements of how much is too much of anything. So one of the examples I came across is something called carmine, which is actually like a red powder that is used to dye things, but it's actually made from crushed insects. So if you have allergic reactions to certain types of proteins, that could trigger a response for you or in you. Similarly, certain things like turmeric, which has that yellow substance color that stains everything, or other kind of botanical extracts can also potentially trigger sensitivities or allergies. And of course, I just want to acknowledge, yes, there are definitely people who are allergic to or have effects from synthetic dyes, but what we see in research is these natural substances sometimes aren't uniform, like they don't give the same kind of vibrancy to things, and they're not very shelf stable because they're degrading. So to kind of promote safe synthetic dyes or artificial dyes, is to say encouraging people to eat certain things, because when you're looking at something that's like ugh, pale and kind of gray and there's no pretty vibrancy in it, right? We talked not too long ago about food waste. You either throw it away or it doesn't look appetizing. And people sometimes psychologically feel like, oh, it's not good. It's not going to taste good either, just because it's a different color. So if we end up getting rid of some of these integrated synthetic dyes and we start going towards natural substances, we might see changes and differentiations in things. Kind of like when you see clothing, right? This fabric might appear in different colors once you wash it or put it through the washing machine, and that's just because it's a natural dye. So just some information to take away from this discussion. And then here I want to point out home tests. So not necessarily things that like your doctor sending you home with a blood pressure cuff or finger sticks for your blood sugar. It's stuff that you're seeing through infomercials. Are you toxic in whatever chemical, or let's look at deficiencies, or send in this particular thing to a lab. These are really, really costly. If things that you don't have covered through your insurance, they're probably going to be the same price anyway. So I'd rather go get a doctor tell me if I'm deficient in something and go for a different kind of test there and pay out of pocket than take a chance with some of these home tests. So some of the research I found when I was putting this webinar together was a very large review of a variety of different home tests, found that they were generally inadequate. And a lot of them just had this tiny disclaimer saying false positive or false negative results may occur. So what are you even buying if you're not going to get accurate information? Lastly, in America, we have this thing called the in vitro diagnostic products standards. So if you're purchasing things over the internet or through outside of America, it is impossible to find out if they are adhering to the standards and regulations that we have for these types of tests. So again, be really careful, be an educated consumer, and go talk to your doctor instead and see what you can do instead of mailing things away. Last but not least here, I'm going to bring it back around to that discussion I mentioned earlier about fear mongering and cherry picking. Again, we have some of these keywords, these hot topics, these phrases that come up a lot. Pesticides are going to kill you. If you can't pronounce something on an ingredient label, then don't eat it. If your grandmother didn't make it, then don't include it in your food. That's not always true. I think we shared in one of the past webinars too, something like, tocopherol is vitamin E. That's just the chemical term for tocopherol. Riboflavin is the chemical term for one of the B vitamins. So just because you can't pronounce something doesn't necessarily mean it's bad for you. You just have to know what it is that you're eating. So within reason here, I think, again, speaking to that marketing and the fear mongering thing that really leads us in the direction of what's known as healthism and elitism. So I'm afraid to eat vegetables if they're not organic, but I can't afford organic vegetables. So I'm just not going to eat any vegetables anymore. I really don't want that to be okay. I want you to be able to feel safe. And again, that generally recognized as safe threshold, if there are pesticides in something or food dyes in something, we're hoping that you're not eating so much that's going to put you in toxic risk. We're varying our diet, and there's little bits and pieces that are okay for us to eat in small amounts. We also noticed too that, especially with the fear-mongering discussion, these questions, it's possible that there's some questionable scientific methods being used for some organizations to kind of like pitch their narrative, and they cherry pick data, which means they don't have enough information and they didn't necessarily do the proper research on it, but they have just enough to support, see, what I said was true. But again, they're hoping that we as the lay population are unaware of how to understand scientific methods and that we won't question it. We'll just believe the people who are speaking louder. All right, so what I want to share with you in the coming slides, sometimes I include some of my colleagues in these discussions, and these are three wellness professionals that I really go to that I think do a fantastic job with dispelling some myths, clarifying misinformation, and they do it in a very respectful and educational way. Some of them do some of like funny, sarcastic things, but Erin here, she's a chemical engineer and a food scientist. She goes under the name of Food Science Babe. She has a YouTube channel. She has a TikTok platform, and she has an Instagram platform too, where she goes through whatever the hot topics are and she explains why this is or is not correct. We have Dr. Jessica Nurick. She's a registered dietitian like I am, but she also has a doctorate in nutrition science. So she goes through again and gives a lot of background into what is to be dispelled, or she shares information and explains in very detailed but clear and simple language as to why you should or should not believe what is out there. And then last but not least, one of my personal favorite heroes, Monica Reinagel. She has a podcast, very small podcast, 5 to 10 minutes episodes, where she either answers listeners' questions or she pulls out science that has made it through the mainstream to really clarify what you're looking at and what it means. And she also provides you with really helpful and practical tips. So even if you're like, listen, Monica, you can tell me till you're blue in the face all the things that are true or not true, I'm still going to do my own thing. She tells you, okay, if you're going to do your own thing, do this, because that's something that will be safe and protected. We don't want you putting yourself in harm's way. All right, speaking of practical tips, I thought I'd put together a few slides just to help you assess some of your own intake and make some informed decisions going forward. One of them that comes up a lot, as I just said, we're not going to escape eating packaged foods. It's just part of convenience. It's easy, they're cheaper, whatever. And I want us to get used to reading nutrition labels. So we've seen some previous webinars about that. And I kind of joke sometimes that the front of the packaging, as I just said before, the front of the packaging is marketing, it's fiction, but the back is where all the information lives. I'm going to say if something passes soon, I could be wrong about that. I just got an alert from the FDA, breaking news, that they are considering putting an info box on the front of packaging that spotlights saturated fat, sodium content, and added sugars. So quite literally at a glance, you can scan through on the front of packaging. So right now, as they always do, it's open to public comment. So they put it out there. What do you think? Is this easy to read? Should we do it differently? Pros and cons about it. And then if they implement it, it could take a couple of years, but you might see a new type of packaging where the front is no longer fiction. So just getting a little bit savvy of making those decisions. We mentioned earlier too, consider diet first. It's a little hard for everybody to eat whole foods all the time or feel like you have to cook everything from scratch, but try to make really good informed decisions. Try to decrease the amount of those added things that are not necessary. Take more control of what you're adding into your diet, whether you're seasoning things or adding salt or oils versus buying the already made product for you that doesn't take your health into account. We had a whole webinar back in, I think, January, right? Meal planning made easy. So you can go back and check that out on the YouTube channel and learn about how do you plan meals. Even if you're not shopping and cooking and doing all the things on your own, how can you kind of be mindful about what you're taking into your diet? Focus on reputable sources. Again, with the disclaimer here, I'm not entirely sure what the future holds for some of these government organizations, but right now, the National Institutes of Health has an office called the Office of Dietary Supplements. So if you are looking to get supplements on your own or through your doctor's prescription, please check this first. They have some really good user-friendly resources. And then for those of us on the healthcare end, the professionals, they have data fact sheets so we can kind of check and give information to our patients to see if there are any food or nutrition interactions involved in any of the things that are being supplemented. Always, always, always talk to your healthcare team, loop people into whatever it is that you're starting or stopping, especially if it comes to medication or supplement changes. I hope that goes without saying. And if you are going to supplement, make sure you are doing so safely. So you see the logos here. I think it's over half of Americans take some sort of some kind of vitamin or supplement, even if they don't think they need it or they haven't been told they're deficient in something, they're still supplementing. But not a lot of them understand that the quality of those supplements can vary quite greatly. So here we have these organizations that do check the standards and deem things to be safe. So if you have a brand name that you enjoy, make sure you turn it over and you see if this stamp is on there from either the NSF or the USP. That one in the middle is also geared towards athletes because there could be performance enhancing or ergogenic supplements that can end up blocking them from competing because they come up as, in their drug tests and stuff. But so there's stamps on certain supplements that are like creatine, I think is one of the big ones too. So there's supplements that will have the NSF certified for sports. So you'll come out clean if you're doing your drug test for that. All right, friends, as always, I like to stop on a slide and ask you just to kind of consider some of the things. It was a lot. It was a lot today. I understand. But consider some of the things, the takeaways. Maybe there's something you want to start doing differently in your environment, in your routine. Maybe you're like, I'm already good, I'm savvy, I'm totally educated with all this. This was just validation for you to keep doing the things that you're doing. Or maybe you want to stop doing something that is no longer serving you. So maybe you want to start looking at food labels and checking out more information online about supplementation. Maybe you want to keep adding quality fruits and vegetables into your diet. And maybe you want to stop listening to people on the internet who do not know what they're talking about so you can stay safe in the choices that you're making. And